All right, today we'll be finishing off our series on weathering the storm. We've been talking about Noah for the past 2 weeks and just how Noah has experienced a global catastrophe, kind of like how we have. But Noah's also been in a situation where it's taken a long time for him to be able to get out of the catastrophe that he's in. And we've talked about how Noah has dealt with how he has dealt with crisis and how he's had a perspective on it, how he's had a perspective of not just looking backwards, but also looking forwards. When he changed his mind from sending out a raven to sending out a dove, instead of sending out a raven and looking back towards destruction, he sent out a dove and looked towards redemption and new creation that God was participating in. So as we come to this point, Noah's just about to step off the ark. So to rehash, in Genesis 8:18 through 19, it says, "So Noah came out together with his sons and his wife and his sons' wives, and all the animals and all the creatures that move along the ground, and all the birds and everything that moves on the land came out of the ark, one kind after another." So this is where we left off. Noah, the flood has ended, the waters have receded, and God has opened up the ark. He said, "It's time to return to normal life. It's time to go back to the way that things were before, if that's possible." And this week, I want to talk about what is Noah's approach? What does Noah end up doing as a result of getting out of this crisis? When he finally hits that moment, he says, "All right, well, we're back on land. We're back to a situation that is more of a normal life." And so I've seen this all over the place, whether it's on social media or having conversations with people. People are starting to ask the question, like, what is the first thing that you're going to do when all this is over? And I think that there's not just one answer to this. There's a variety of answers. One that's already been happening is that people, as beaches have been opening up, people just take to the beach. And they want to get sunshine that they haven't been able to get for months. And I say that my wife's probably in this category. She loves being outside, especially when it's a nice day outside. So maybe for you, maybe you're thinking like, "Oh, I can't wait to be able to go to the beach, just go outside, just actually go somewhere to get, it's not cooped up, and that's not in quarantine." Or maybe, for me, I don't know if you guys recognize this. This is over in Kittery. This is Tulsi, and Tulsi is an Indian restaurant. It's probably my favorite place to eat. And I know they do takeout right now, but it's really not the same. And I can go there and get takeout, but it's going to take me 20 minutes to drive over there, 20 minutes to drive back. The food will be cold. You don't get like the same experience. I can't wait till I go back to Tulsi and just sit down and I have that hot, fresh Indian meal in front of me. But I think for a lot of us, we're just looking to say, like, let me just hang out with people. Let me just be in a situation where I can high five someone, where I can give someone a hug and say, like, "I've missed you." To just be able to have that bonfire that maybe you've been planning for months, to be able to have people over to celebrate something. That's something that I think a lot of people resonate with. But there's all these different ideas of like, yeah, I want to do this when I get out. But what does this look like for Noah? Noah's experienced something where he's been cooped up for the past 230 days, and Noah makes a decisive action on what he wants to do the first thing that he gets out. So here's Noah's priority. It's found in Genesis 8:20. It says, "Then Noah built an altar to the Lord, and taking some of the clean animals and some of the clean birds, he sacrificed burnt offerings on it." Now, Noah has like a lot of things that could be his priority right now. He just got off the ark, and he's got his job essentially to rebuild the world. So Noah could be out there saying, "Well, I need to start planting crops, or I need to start building my house, or I need to fill in the blank." But Noah takes the time and he says, "You know what? My priority right now is I want to set up an altar, and I want to make a sacrifice on that altar." And I don't know if that's the priority that any of us have right now. It's like, "Oh yeah, I want to make a sacrifice." And maybe for us, it's not going to look like a literal sacrifice of animals, but I want to talk about the idea of sacrifice. And even in a time where we feel like we have nothing or a lot of things have been taken away for us, I think Noah looks at this opportunity and he makes a sacrifice, even though he's lost a lot. And even though he's been in a position where he's been in self-isolation with his family for a long time. And I want to say, first of all, that a sacrifice costs something. Um, you could say that you can make a sacrifice, and there could be bigger sacrifices and smaller sacrifices. But at the end of the day, if you're really going to make a sacrifice, it'll cost you something, whether that's time or money or talent or something like that. Um, Inevitably, a sacrifice costs something. And one of my favorite movies, I think, illustrates this point very well. I don't know if you guys have seen this movie. You probably should have at this point. But Thanos, I think, understands the idea of sacrifice quite well, even though his motive is kind of skewed in sacrifice. So let me.
Daughter.
Did you do it?
Yes.
What did it cost?
Everything.
So now I won't get into the movie and the plot because just in case you haven't seen it, I won't be that person who spoils it. But Thanos, during the movie, he makes a really big sacrifice in order to achieve his goal. Now, like I said before, he uses his goal for selfishness and for his own desires, but he understands that a sacrifice is not something that costs just a little bit. A sacrifice is something that costs him everything. And I think oftentimes, like, a sacrifice is something that does cost us something. A sacrifice is not just a cheap thing that we do, but it comes with a cost. So I think that in order to understand the scope of Noah's sacrifice, we need to take a look at the context. Because I think when you just read that he makes a sacrifice, it's like, okay, he made a sacrifice, but there's really a lot more going on there when you take a look at the entire context. So in Genesis 6:20, it says, two of every kind of bird, every kind of animal, and every kind of creature that moves along the ground will come to you to be kept alive. So when we hear the story of Noah, right, we typically think, okay, two animals of each type come to the ark. And Noah gathers them all up in the ark, and they're saved from the oncoming flood. But actually, there's more to it than that. It's not just two of every kind of animal. And this even caught me a little bit by surprise when I was looking at it. But it's not just two of every kind of animal. There's more that's going on behind the scene. But I think that there's kind of two elements to a sacrifice. That a sacrifice costs what you have been given. So in this case, it says that God has caused every one of these animals to come to the ark. So essentially, like, Noah's just kind of sitting there with his list, and he's saying, all right, you're checked off, you're checked off, you're checked off, you're good. All right, we got everybody, we're coming on board. It's kind of like when we're on a retreat, right? And we're saying, all right, we got to check the list off. Is everybody here? All the animals come to Noah. So it's something where it's almost like he's being given these animals. And I think sometimes the sacrifice costs we've been given. And this might be like a lower end of a sacrifice where maybe we have something, we say, oh, I'll share it with someone, even though it's not really a big deal. It's not going to cost me a tremendous amount of something. But sometimes when we've been given something, we give it away, it's still a sacrifice in a sense. But let's take a look at what sacrifice did Noah offer. So in Genesis 7, if we go back one chapter from where we've been at, it says, take with you 7 pairs of every kind of clean animal, a male and its mate, and 1 pair of every kind of unclean animal, a male and its mate, and also 7 pairs of every kind of bird, male and female, to keep their various kinds alive throughout the earth. So right here, it says that Noah actually has to have 7 pairs of every kind of clean animal and 7 pairs of every kind of bird. So maybe you were thinking, oh, wait, I thought Noah just took 2 of every type of animal on board with him. Like he did, but he had to take 7 pairs of clean animals and 7 pairs of birds. And I think there's a reason for this. So if you look at clean animals are typically animals that you would eat. So like, think of like cows or chickens or things like that you normally be able to use either for yourself for food or for a sacrifice. And but when it says 7 pairs here, think about before. If we look back before, it says that 2 of each kind of animal will come to Noah. But here, God's asking Noah to bring on board 7 pairs. So if you do the math, Noah still needs to get 6 pairs of each kind of animal to go on board the ark with him, if they're a clean animal. And so if that's the case, for these animals, Noah's not just sitting there and watching the animals come to him. Noah has to find those animals. So that means that Noah goes out and tracks these animals down and captures them and brings them back. Or maybe Noah goes to the market and Noah buys these animals with his own money. And this is something where Noah's, in a sense, earned these animals versus the other animals. Yeah, God kind of just gave them to him. They showed up. Noah didn't really have to do too much there. But here, Noah has to actively invest his time. He has to invest his money. He has to invest his effort into finding the rest of these animals. And if we look, what kind of animal does God ask Noah to sacrifice? He asks him to sacrifice the clean animals. And instead of God saying, all right, you have to sacrifice this, here's the sacrifice, I'm just going to give it to you, just make sure you give it back to me. God's asking Noah for a sacrifice from something that costs him something. And as we saw before, like a sacrifice has to cost you something. And there's a difference between sacrifices that have been given, like Noah was given the first pair of animals by God, but these animals here are sacrifices that have cost something that Noah's earned. And I think that kind of sacrifice kind of costs you a bit more. You think about it twice before you make a sacrifice like that. When you said, oh, well, I've worked hard to get this, or I deserve this, or I earned this. And then for someone to ask you to sacrifice that thing, it's very difficult to do versus something that maybe you don't really care about as much. It's easier to give up. So for example, there's for about 5 years, every year for Christmas, one of my aunts used to get me Sudoku puzzles. The reason why she got me Sudoku puzzles was because when I was like 8 years old, she heard that I was doing them. So she got them for me. But then I probably did about 10 of these, and then I kind of gave up on them. But every single year, she would give me a new like Sudoku puzzle book. And I would kind of get it and be like, great, thanks. Like, this isn't that awesome, but thanks anyway. But it was, in her mind, I think it was a quick way to kind of give a gift. And in that sense, like that gift that she was giving me, that wasn't really a sacrificial gift because she didn't spend the time to ask me like, hey, what do you want? Or to say, let me spend some more money on something that I think that he might like. But it was almost just like a filler kind of gift to say, well, this is something that is easy and something I can check off the list, and here you go, you can have it. Versus, so my birthday was a couple days ago, and one of my friends named Julie, she sent me a picture. So this is a picture of my dog Kiefer from when he was a puppy. So she was thinking ahead. She was thinking, well, Paul's going to have a birthday and he's going to be locked down in self-isolation. So why don't I do something special? And why don't I send him something that takes a little bit of time, takes a little bit of effort? So she used the supplies that she had bought with her own money, and she spent days and days creating this picture. That's something that I wouldn't be able to do. I'm not an artist in the least, but you can tell there's a lot of intentionality and there's a lot of sacrifice in the time and the material that she took to be able to give that gift to me. And I think that there's a difference between these two kind of gifts. One is a quick like, oh, well, not a big deal, I can do this. The other one is saying, I'm going to make an investment in this. And this is something that's going to cost me something to be able to pull it off. And now like I'm much more grateful for this picture that my friend has gotten me than for a quick casual gift that my aunt might have gotten me over Christmas. And I think that this is the case for Noah too. I think for Noah, when Noah is being asked to sacrifice these clean animals, they're not just something that he's earned, but they're also something that's the future food that he has. So if you think about it, right, all the other animals have been wiped out. So it's only these animals that are on the ark that Noah has to work with. So if you look at like animal husbandry, like Noah's using these animals for clothing. He'll use these animals for food. He'll use them for milk, for all sorts of other things that are going to keep him and his family alive. But he's not going to hold those things back. He's going to actually surrender them, and he's going to surrender them in sacrifice, because he realizes that sacrificing to God is more important than holding on to things for his own security or for his own means and for his own purposes. And I think it's a bold move to do that, because I think that Noah could be wondering, like, well, maybe I shouldn't do this, because the wise thing might be to just look out for myself. But instead, Noah says, I know what my priority is. My priority is I want to sacrifice to God and make that first and foremost. And he also built an altar. So he didn't just sacrifice animals and said, all right, we're done with this. But he set up and constructed an altar even before he constructed his own house. And I think that's important, because an altar is a place where people can come and offer sacrifices continually. That's not just a one and done deal. He's setting up an opportunity to say, I'm going to make this sacrifice, and this is going to be the place that we're going to make sacrifices from now on. So he's setting up a precedent for the future. And he's setting himself up so that in the future, when God provides and when God has more for him, he's still going to be in a place where he's continuing to sacrifice. And we also see that God honors the sacrifice. So it says that in verse 21 that the Lord smelled the pleasing aroma and said in his heart, never again will I curse the ground because of humans, even though every inclination of the human heart is evil from childhood, and never again will I destroy all living creatures as I've done. So God doesn't just see the sacrifice and say, oh, that's nice. Like, God honors the sacrifice, and God honors it by making this promise to Noah. And I think, so for us, I don't think we're going to be sacrificing animals, but I think maybe God's calling us to sacrifice something kind of on our way out of this whole pandemic that we've been experiencing, right? We're starting to see kind of the first signs of that. We're seeing that some states have been releasing people to go back to work. We're seeing that some states have different plans so that there'll be different phases where people will be able to phase back into society. But I think an important thing to consider is, like, what is our priority? I think, like, when we ask this question, like, what is the first thing you're going to do when this is all over? What is that for you? And maybe what you're going to do, maybe it should involve sacrifice of some sort. Maybe instead of continuing on the way that you're going to plan forward, and maybe the way that you're thinking about going back to life as it was, your priorities, maybe they need to shift a little bit. Maybe your priorities become something where you focus more on others and rather than yourself. So I've got a few different ideas of what that could look like. And maybe not one of these will apply to you, but maybe some will, and it'll give you an idea. So maybe you have like a friend that wants to go see a movie after this is all over, but their family's in a situation where after this crisis, they just can't afford to go to a movie. So maybe you spot them the money to go to that movie with you, and say, hey, you know what? Like, this isn't a big deal. Like, I want to spend time with you, and I want to make the sacrifice of my own money to be able to give you the opportunity to come see this movie with me. Or maybe it's something that you've wanted to hang out with your normal crew of friends, but you know that there's somebody else that they might be kind of annoying. And you say, you know what? Since we're coming out of this, maybe I'll sacrifice and I'll go and I'll pick that person up, or I'll ask my parents to pick that person up so that they can hang out with the rest of us. When normally you'd say, I just want to see like my best friends, and I really don't want to see this other person. Maybe instead you say, I want to include this other person. And I want to, even though it might be an annoyance to me for this person to be around, I'm willing to make that sacrifice. I'm willing to include that person in so that they feel like they belong again. Maybe it's you take some of your time that you have, and even though you haven't been able to do so many things for so long, and now eventually you're going to have your opportunity to be free to do whatever you want, maybe you take some of that time and you dedicate it to doing something like feeding the homeless or serving somewhere that serves in your community. Or maybe you take the money that you're spending on coffee and you're just like, I can't wait for my favorite coffee place to open up again. And instead of spending that money on yourself, maybe you give that to somebody else and you say, you know what? Like, I want you to be able to enjoy coffee when you go out. I want you to be able to enjoy this. And I know that's something that you wouldn't normally be able to enjoy. And I think even talking about like this last week, like what is your perspective in coming out of it? Is your perspective going to be looking back and saying like, oh man, I've had all this time that's been wasted? Or is your perspective, how can I move forward and join with God in recreating, in bringing goodness out of something bad that's happened? And maybe for you, maybe that includes an element of sacrifice. And I'm not just talking about sacrifices and like, oh, this is something I would have done anyway. It's something like above and beyond, where you're saying, well, this is going to cost me something. This might hurt me a little bit to do this, but I'm going to do it for the sake of another person. I'm going to do this so that I can set a new precedent moving forward. And I think, like I said, since they are costly, like it's a difficult thing to do. Like it was very easy for my aunt to pick that gift out continually because it was just an easy thing to do. But for my friend Julie to realize that I was going to have my birthday during this time, that's something that took some thought. That's something that took some time. It's something that took some effort. But what are you going to do? What's the first thing you're going to do when you get off out of your house, when you're able to see other people? Is it going to be something where you're like, I can't wait to do this stuff for me? Or are you going to say, you know what? This is going to be different. I'm willing to make a sacrifice or something, even if it costs me something, because I know that's going to make an impact on someone who's around me. So let me just pray, and then we'll break out into small groups. Lord God, I thank you that you've given us the example of Noah. I think you've shown us who he is and his nature. He's willing to sacrifice for his fellow people, but also to you, Lord God. I pray that we'd be able to do that we'd be able to not hold what we have in our hands tightly, even if we've earned it, even if we've deserved it. I pray that we'd be willing to be generous, that we'd be willing to give to other people, that we'd be gracious to other people, that we would include other people in our plans, Lord God, even though it might be an inconvenience to us. I pray that as we get out of this, that you'd fill us with your Holy Spirit, that we'd be able to make the right choices, and that we'd be able to just hold on to hope and spread that hope to other people around us. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.